It's not an easy place to get to. So anybody who is on this path, like, I commend that it takes courage, and kudos to you because you're breaking free.
Welcome to Herbalism Uncensored, the podcast where we dig deep into the world of herbalism and natural healing. I'm Alicia.
And I'm Lila. We're two clinical herbalists who recognize the need for honest and authentic conversations about the state of natural healing today. As practitioners, we feel called to have uncensored discussions about why people aren't finding relief and what to do about it.
If you're frustrated by lack of results, overwhelmed by conflicting advice online, disillusioned by the commercialization of wellness, or simply passionate about natural healing, you're in the right place.
This podcast is our way of cutting through the noise, busting myths, and challenging marketing gimmicks, all while inspiring real, lasting results for professionals and individuals alike.
We're going to get real, calling out what works, what doesn't, and why. Our goal is to equip you with the tools to take charge of your health. We're here to help everyone rethink clinical success and achieve better outcomes.
We're honored to be here and feel privileged to contribute to the realistic and functional growth of our professions, one where they effectively support all people on their journeys to feel better.
This is Herbalism Uncensored,
where together we're nurturing the future of natural healing.
The contents of this podcast are for informational purposes only and are not intended to be a substitute in any way for professional medical advice, treatment, or diagnosis. It's important that you always seek the advice of your physician or other licensed healthcare provider with any questions or concerns you may have regarding a medical condition.
Welcome to another episode of Herbalism Uncensored. Today we are doing an uncensored discussion, continuing our theme of addiction. Last episode, we had Dr. Shaw on.
Dr. Shaw is a neurologist and a practicing addictionologist, and he had some really interesting stuff to say about addiction and the way it works in the brain. And he talked about recovery as a 3-stage process, which I thought was really interesting because a lot of the recovery field looks at addiction recovery as mind, body, and spirit.
Yeah, so I think it'd be really interesting to kind of revisit some of these topics and expand upon them in some new context and talk more about what it is that we do and how we can support people dealing with addiction. And I love that you brought up the 3 physical planes that you have to operate on, because I think just a great anchoring point for this conversation is to bring it back to, it's not necessarily about the substance, it's about the person and what's going on in their field of existence that makes this substance and this addiction a problem, right? Alcohol is neutral. It's the context alcohol is being used in that makes it bad. And so let's start there of talking about what it is, again, recapping, that makes people turn to these substances that really impacts their lives in a negative way.
Okay. So my belief and experience is that the problem's spiritual in nature. And I don't think that it's only addicts or only alcoholics that have this issue. Everybody has this issue. It's not the addiction condition or the alcoholic condition. It's the human condition. The human condition is that we have to figure out how to be spiritual beings and have the human experience. And the human experience can be really uncomfortable. And some people find it more uncomfortable than others. And we have feelings. Like, I get to feel today a full range of human emotions. And that's really awesome. Now, joy, a really fun human emotion. Ecstasy is a great human emotion. Contentment is a very lovely way to feel. But grief and sadness and anger are also feelings that are part of that full spectrum that the universe has really endowed us with. So I get to grieve today, and I get to feel sad, and I get to experience anger. But when those uncomfortable emotions crop up, I think part of the human experience is to seek ways to change the way we feel. And we can do that with something like trying to think of something really benign, right? Like I could eat my feelings. I could have like an extra candy bar. I could lose my temper and yell when I'm feeling angry. That kind of releases some of that energy, right? I could go a little bit further and I could overindulge in sugar to the point that I'm diabetic. I could drink so much coffee that I have adrenal fatigue and I'm chronically fatigued and can't function without it. Or then you have the full end of the spectrum where you've got somebody who gets up in the morning and has a glass of wine with ice in it because otherwise they start shaking. Or someone who, this was my experience 15, 16 years ago, where I woke up and I took 20 hydrocodone to get out of bed because I couldn't get out of bed without them. It was the only way I could function.
You touched on something interesting, and it's that all disease, and addiction's a disease, all disease is spiritual in nature. And whether we're talking about fibromyalgia or addiction or alcoholism or diabetes or anything in between, I think at the root of everything, we're living in conflict, or we're living in a way that's not in alignment with our higher nature. And at the end of the day, when we do want to overcome these things, we want to feel better in our bodies, we want to overcome our addictions, we're just trying to live a good life. We're just trying to find our happiness and our health and our peace. And so it's interesting because even though we're specifically going to be talking about addiction this episode, as you touched on, the journey is the same. It's the same journey that people are going. We're just dealing with different specifics. And I think that's really, really important to kind of acknowledge because it's the human condition. Like you said, we're all just on this path to find peace and contentment and all these things that just make us feel okay inside. And when people are struggling with addiction, it's because they don't feel okay inside. And we need to have more compassion about it. And it's not just a matter of willpower. Oh, Johnny can't let go of the alcohol because he sucks. It's like there's a deep wound going on there that makes it hard for people to move out of this space.
And that's so interesting that you say that. This might be veering off topic because I understand substance use disorder. I think that's the medical term for it. I understand alcoholism and addiction. I understand that because I've been there. I understand doing something that I don't want to do because it's just beyond my control. It's something that I don't have a choice over. I totally understand that. But I can get really, like, I'm telling on myself here, where I can really lack compassion for people who do things like shoplift or can't manage their money and have credit card debt, or someone who overeats, but it's all the same thing at the end of the day. It's all that feeling. It's that God-sized hole. It's that hole within me. That's something that's missing that I fill with fellowship, community, and spirituality. And only then does that obsession to indulge in the substance or the behavior dissipate.
Well, that's funny that you find yourself lacking compassion for these other things because they're outside of your purview, right? It's not in your experience. But a shoplifter might feel compassion for another shoplifter. And it's just such a good reminder that we each have such unique individual lenses for the world, and our experience really shapes and colors how we see things. But as you said, at the end of the day, it really is all the same conditioning. And this conditioning, I know you and I both have done some psychological face reading and psychological studying to understand people a little better and why it is we do the things we do and we act the way we act. And it all goes back to wounds that form before we're the age of 3 years old. And when you think of it that way, when you think about the fact that we are where we're at because I'm going to say it, we didn't get enough cuddles as children, right? We didn't get the support we need. We weren't told the world's safe. We weren't given the nourishment that we required to be whole people that love ourselves. It leads us to do certain things. You had your addictions, other people have their vices and their outlets, and it's sometimes hard to find compassion for all of it, but we're all just filling that wound, that gaping hole.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you're making me think about, you're really opening my mind here because we work with people who are diabetic. And that's what I think. I'm like, just stop eating sugar. Like, you can't eat sugar. You just have to stop. And I don't understand why some of them won't stop, but it's probably the same way some people look at addicts.
Give up the alcohol. Well, and I don't know if you have the same philosophy. And I had this conversation with a client this week who was kind of beating himself up because he couldn't fix his patterning. He kept, doing something that wasn't serving his health or where he wanted to be. And I truly believe it's not a matter of willpower. Being told or thinking that people can just muscle their way through their vices or their addictions or these habits that they have that they don't want is a matter of willpower is a disservice, especially when we're talking about all of these things that run deep, whether it's eating, sugar addiction, love addiction, addiction to substances, or just like engaging in things that don't serve us. You're never going to willpower your way out of it. Willpower is finite. And unless you actually go back and you figure out what the source of it is and you address that, like the person will never be free and able to confidently get on the path that they want to get on. And, I take a functional nutrition approach to a lot of the work I do. And my approach is never just give up the sugar, because I know that there's physical reasons that we are craving and reaching for sugar, right? There are physiological responses in our bodies that make us reach for these things that don't serve us. There's mental pieces to it. There's cultural reasons that we reach for these things, or socioeconomical reasons that we search for these things. There's trauma responses, there's patterning, there's conditioning, there's all these mental reasons. And then there's a spiritual component as well, that people continually reach for these things. And you have to bring wholeness to the issue so people can sustain themselves when they are trying to break free of these substance addictions.
Absolutely. I know you talked about cross tapering, like with sugar, right? Like, using honey instead for a while as you
Mhm.
gradually reduce. And that's the kind of the thing that Dr. Shaw was talking about doing with heroin and using Suboxone. You get off the heroin, use Suboxone for a short period of time, and then you taper off of the Suboxone instead. Or you get off the alcohol onto the benzos and taper off of the benzos. And then we've done that with people with somebody who doesn't want to take their benzos anymore, somebody who doesn't want to take this antidepressant anymore. They can gradually reduce that while they replace with, what do we do with the woman with the anti-anxiety medication? We did Shankapushpi, which is just fun to say, Shankapushpi. And another one was taking antidepressant, and I think we did Bacopa. That there were a couple of different herbs. Like she had a different protocol, and she just gradually reduced her antidepressant and increased the herbs.
Yeah, I like to say we crowd it out. And the place we start, as Dr. Shaw was talking about, was the physical. So we give our body the physical things it needs to crave these substances less, and then we help people come off of them. That's our entry point, is working on the physical. And I think that's really interesting because it mirrors pretty much any work we do with anyone that has a chronic disease, chronic symptoms, or health issue that they're trying to overcome. Is we start with the physical body because that's the easiest place to evoke change. And when we can help people feel good physically, then they can have more space to work on the next layer, which is the mental reason that kind of got them there in the first place. Would you agree with that?
I would. This is wild, actually, because looking at the stages of recovery, you could apply it to all of the work that we do. Maybe I just made that connection and you made the connection before we hit record. Is that what happened? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, the first things first, let's take out the thing that's harmful, whether it's the alcohol or the heroin or the sugar or the, I don't want to say bad behavior, but we could say the unmanageable behavior. And how do we support the body while we do that? So I think this is a good place to talk about root vegetables. At this stage, the thing that I would want to do is increase circulation and support the liver, because the liver is, and the lymphatic system, because this is our body's garbage disposal system. This is how we get the stuff out that we don't want in.
Yeah.
So like beet juicing,
Are you talking in the context of detoxing someone?
detoxing.
Right. Right. Okay. So you want to get the substance out of their system.
Yeah.
Right. So we support the body's natural pathways, which, as you're saying, okay.
Yeah. Root vegetables, can juice beets, juice carrots, circulatory stimulants like ginger, cayenne. And then if we're talking about like process addictions or unmanageable behaviors, I think bupleurum would be a great one for that, because it moves stagnant chi, like when we have energy that's stuck somewhere, and helps to get it out. Michael Tierra says that it dredges the liver. Like if I'm engaging in a behavior that I don't want to engage in, and I don't know why. Something that will drudge my liver and bring stuck emotions out and move through my liver. This is like traditional Chinese language, moving the chi. There's energy in your body. It's supposed to flow freely. If it gets stuck in your liver, that's not good. So if we can dredge that up and get it moving, then we can get it out. And then maybe it's a little bit easier to identify what is that thing? What am I running away from?
Just for our listeners, I want to kind of go back and reiterate something that I don't know if it's obvious or not, but when we engage in behaviors that don't serve us, there are physiological consequences. Alcohol has physiological side effects. Stress has physiological side effects. Being in a bad domestic relationship has physiological side effects. And there's
Ooh,
things that we can.
codependency has physiological side effects. Yes.
It does. And so when we're talking about these things, it might sound silly or far out to think that if you're in a bad or unwanted situation, juice some beets. But when you really look at it, a holistic context of a person and how the physical interplays with the mental, that interplays with the spiritual, it's such a interesting approach to think that, okay, we have a problem, we're stagnant, we're stuck in life, things aren't flowing like we want. Let's support the liver. I think that's a foreign concept for people. So I just want to put some extra attention there because one, it's fascinating, but two, it's so real and true. And I know this to be such a truth in my practice. When people come with physiological ailments, they mirror things that are going on in their lives. And it's without fail. And it's just so fascinating to me that it works like that.
Up.
And I'll just give another example on one of those things that is representative of that is when people have poor boundaries with the world, 100% they have gut issues. The gut is one of the biggest barriers in our body to taking things from the outside world and turning it into something that can be used internally. And so when we have poor boundaries in the actual external world, when we interface with other humans, that translates to what's going on inside our body, which is super interesting because you can almost assess what kind of physical issues people have based on how they interact with the world.
Oh gosh. So I was looking at what emotions are governed by the liver
Is it anger
and irritability.
and irritability?
Yes,
Yes.
anger and irritability, impatience and frustration. Stagnant liver chi leads to frustration, resentment, and outbursts of anger. It is the alcoholic organ, y'all. And if the anger isn't expressed, it leads to depression. So if you're angry, impatient, or depressed, then moving some liver chi would be a great idea. And to your point, that how we interact with the world is indicative of what's going on in the body. I just had a client that came to me with COPD, recently diagnosed with COPD. She's having a hard time exhaling. Well, from an Ayurvedic standpoint, that's a subdosha of Vata. It's called Udana Vayu, not to get too deep into Ayurvedic philosophy. And I told the client during the session, this energy governs exhalation, it governs communication, and it controls the tongue. There's been a history of poor communication, and this is someone who loses their temper and says things that they don't want to say. And she laughed out loud when I said it controls the tongue, because there's no control of the tongue and there's no exhalation. It's all connected. It really is. The more I work with people, the more clients I see, the more obvious it is to me that I can almost tell what's going on with somebody's body by the way they talk in the first 10 minutes of the session.
That got me thinking on 4 different things. I've had clients that were supporting inflammation and liver support, and they're like, "My road rage is gone." Yeah, because your anger is getting moved, and it's so cool. And when we think about people that have addictions, and especially with alcohol, there is an anger there, and I think there's an anger towards the self, and that's one of the things that we're running away from, and then that makes us more angry, right? It's kind of like this self-reinforcing loop that people get caught in. And so when we're talking about removing yourself from the substance and supporting your liver, that's an entry point to give you a break and stop the cycle. Would you agree with that kind of conceptualization of it?
Absolutely. So, a little anecdote, and I can say this because I know my husband doesn't listen to our podcast because he says he's been listening to my podcast for 12 years.
I'm dying.
But during the election and in the months coming up to the election, I put supplements out for him. He doesn't know what he's taking. He just takes whatever I give him. So I just very casually added some liver herbs to his daily regimen and noticed that he got a lot calmer and got less worked up about politics. It just created more peace in him and in the environment and the household. But so yes, there's the anger, the resentment, but what I think we know is that underneath that anger, underneath the resentment and the irritability, there's fear. And that goes back to what Dr. Shaw was bringing up, that once we get removed from the substance, or once we're able to stop doing the thing that we know is detrimental, that's causing unmanageability in our lives, then we have to address the root of it, which is the fear, right? It's that evil and corroding thread that touches through every fabric of our existence. Behind every resentment I have, behind everything that I do that I wish I hadn't done, behind all of that, there is a fear. And the fear resides in the mind. And oh gosh, I can't tell you how fascinating it is for me to think about that place that's the unremitting terror. Because once that fear sets in, then it almost ties back to what we were talking about with stress, that we're here to survive. Inherently, that's part of the human experience too, is to continue on, to continue living, to procreate, to continue on. And the more afraid I am, the more likely I am to do something that I think is going to save me, whether it's going to save me or not. If my brain says this will make it better, even though it doesn't make sense, that's what I'm going to do. And so how do we quiet that? How do we overcome the fear?
Right. And because at that point, when fear kicks in, it's no longer rational. And as we talked about with Dr. Shaw, these fears that we feel, they are rooted in something very deep within us. And it takes a lot to face that. In my opinion, any negative emotion that we're facing, be it anger, disgust, resentment, guilt, it is rooted in fear. And if we can overcome that and we can acknowledge it for what it is and take responsibility for it, then we're free. We're free. If we can get away from being in fear mode, like, we are free. But how do we do that? How do we overcome these wounds from childhood? How do we reset our minds? How do we take that responsibility? How do we look at things differently? How do we get out of this email is going to kill me mode?
I know that. I'm laughing because I know that feeling of, oh this email is going to kill me. I want to answer that, and then I have a question for you. I'll just answer it from my own experience, because when I got robbed in 23, and the mind is so amazing, because I had been praying, putting it out there in the universe, to ask the universe, give me the willingness to go to therapy to work on my mommy issues. Okay. That's how I was putting it, because I had some experiences over the last several years where it had become very apparent to me that I was having a hard time developing meaningful, lasting relationships with women. I could look back over the last 8 years of my life, and every relationship, a close one that I had with a woman, had a 2-year shelf life before I burnt it down. I look at all these relationships and I'm the common denominator. So something's wrong with me here. What do I do about it? And I was asking for willingness to go to therapy to work on my mommy issues. What happens? I get robbed at gunpoint. I get a little PTSD, where I was at the point where I wanted to run every red light after dark. I didn't want to be stopped in my car anywhere, ever. I would go into my backyard after dark and I'm waiting for somebody to come around the corner. And it was just a couple of weeks after the robbery. I meditate in the mornings, and I have a dedicated process that involves reading and writing and prayer and meditation. And I'm in my meditation, just silent breathing. And I have a memory, a repressed memory about some sexual abuse from when I was a child that popped into my head during my meditation. And it rocked me because first off, I was angry because this is like my quiet time with God. And I was like, really, God, this is what's going on. This is what you want to do to me first thing in the morning. And I know now that he was like, I said, he, she, it, whatever you want to call it, was like, here you go. You're ready for this. I sought some counsel and I was told, go to EMDR. Well, the EMDR was really expensive and it made me sick. I got physically ill from it. Not because there's anything with EMDR. I really think that it was just like moving energy through my body. And I ended up with lymphatic infections from all that stuck chi moving. And so in the meantime, I started doing some group stuff, which involved prayer and meditation and a lot of writing. I did so much writing, pointed questions, digging deep, looking back. And I wrote down like every time that I'd ever felt abandoned in my life, every time in my life that I'd ever felt criticized, and on and on and on. I've read a book. I quit going to therapy, but I went back to therapy about 3 months later. And my therapist said, wow, what have you been doing? What have you done? Like, you've obviously done a lot of work while you were gone, and you just keep it up. And I told her I did all of this writing, and I opened up the book and I showed her, and she said, that's the same thing that you get from doing EMDR. It's just most people aren't willing to do all that writing.
Oh, that's funny.
So they come and pay me $250 an hour instead. But I think that was part of it. It's like the moving that stuck energy out of the brain. And I remember the way that the therapist explained it to me. She said, you have to move it to the front of the brain where it can be processed, that it gets stuck. And through the writing process, you move it to the prefrontal cortex where you can process it. So I have
Okay, what's your question?
my question, and you can feel free to say no, but do you want to talk about any process addictions that you've engaged in?
That's a great question. Do you have any that you notice I have?
Well, the bulimia would be a process addiction.
Oh,
Yeah.
eating disorders. I've never thought about it like that. Yeah, let's dive in.
Well, I mean, because that there was a fear behind that process, don't you think?
Well, I mean, it was 100 rooted in not loving who I was and needing to feel like I needed to change myself for the world to love and accept me. And in the context of eating disorders, I was addicted to starving myself and drinking caffeine. I was addicted to diet pills. I remember vomiting neon pink from all the hydroxycut I was taking. I was addicted to not eating or, yeah, vomiting up my meals. It it was 100% an escape. It was an escape because I wasn't comfortable with who I was. And of course I was rooted in fear. Fear that I wasn't good enough, fear that I wasn't pretty enough, fear that nobody would love me and society rejected me and all the things. And that's so funny because I've never thought about that as an addiction. As we've been talking about addiction for a while now, you and I have been talking about it for a couple weeks. Like, I don't consider myself someone with an addictive personality, but I'm probably just in denial. And, I've never been super addicted, like substances other than coffee. I don't think have ever had a huge hold on me, but other things absolutely have. And it's just such an interesting concept to explore for myself and what I have a hard time giving up. I've been addicted to seeking out external validation from males or addicted to getting praise at work, addicted to being right or being in charge, like all of these things that,
Not you.
hey, should we bring up that we're just a bunch of pittas over here with, the predisposition to want to be right and be in charge and be addicted to things?
I'm not convinced that we're all pitta. I mean, everybody's got some pitta in their system. I think you're too
I
tall to just be pitta.
Yeah, I don't I'm still uncovering it, but there is pitta in me.
Oh yes. Yes.
As
Oh,
there you as well.
oh yes. I have quite a bit of pitta in me.
Should we tell people what pitta is?
So, I think if you listen to this podcast every episode for a year, at the end of the year, you're going to know quite a bit about Ayurveda because you get a little nugget in each episode, right? So, do you want to explain it?
I'll give the very basic definition of we have different constitutions. Everybody is constitutionally unique and they fall into one of three categories or a combination of these categories from the Ayurvedic perspective. We have Pitta dosha, Kapha dosha, and Vata dosha. And each of them basically have their own attributes and their own tellings of what can go wrong in your personality and in your physical health and your mental health. And we are talking about Pitta, and that's one of the doshas. And that constitution is very passionate, very fiery, very they get off on being in charge and being productive and buying new nice things, and they tend towards inflammatory conditions, and they are the most predisposed to addiction. Yeah.
Yeah, they tend to be drug seekers in general. But these are people that you need, that no one is better than the other as far as Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. These are all equally balanced energies that we all have in our bodies, but some people have more than others. And people with a lot of Pitta in their constitution these are our politicians. These are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. These are our warriors, our soldiers, and our infantrymen who go off to war. These are people that we need in society. And man, they get things done, but there's so much drive and so much internal pressure to perform that they tend to need some kind of a substance to be able to dampen that fire so that they can relax.
Yeah. Or for me, I like to feel the fire. I like living in the fire. It's not good for me, but it comes with certain gifts, right? Like being hyper productive or being really passionate. Those are fun things to live in, but they do come at a cost. You know, I'm addicted to cayenne and hot things because it fuels my fire and makes me feel all revved up. And in the moment, I like being revved up, but at the end of the day, it's not where I want to be. You know, I want to be more level set and peaceful and calm and content as is. So it's an interesting concept that I think this personality type is more predisposed to these things. I also, this may not be relevant to listeners, but I think I have the angry young man passenger in me, and there's things in my childhood that make me a little reckless and a little angry at the world, and that also shows in the things I engage in. When I was vomiting up my meals, I didn't care if I lived or if it was damaging my health. My mindset was set on one goal and one goal only, and I didn't care how destructive it was for me to get there. I wanted to be skinny. That was my end game. Nothing else mattered.
Wow. Yeah. The way you just put that, I can totally relate to wanting to check out, like wanting to be numb and not caring. The consequences, how I got there didn't matter. How it affected other people didn't matter. How it affected my body didn't matter. Just wanting to be numb. And all of it, yeah, coming from that place of, I could say that I have lived my life under the umbrella of not enough. And that deeply rooted fear of inferiority and inadequacy, just trying so hard not to feel that. So back to what Dr. Shaw was saying, we can calm the fear with safe spaces and safe people, which, man, I am so fortunate and so grateful for the people in my life, particularly the women in my life who have held my hand and walked with me and shown me the way and been patient with me and allowed me to just be imperfect in so many ways and loved me through it as I grow while I pray and meditate, because that's what it came down to for me. If you talk about the fear, how do I quiet the fear? And yeah, we have a list of herbs that can help. There's no, there's nothing in my Ayurveda textbooks that say this herb stops fear. I've looked, it doesn't say that, but there are several things that says this opens up the channels of the mind. And this clears blockages in the thought processes and the pathways where thought runs. This opens the heart, or in traditional Chinese medicine, it nourishes the shin. So these are all things that we can do to help quiet that fear. But for me, herbs help, and healthy living helps, and eating right helps, and nourishing my body helps. But at the end of the day, the real solution is rooted in a belief of something much greater than me. And that's what I liked what Dr. Shaw said. It's about the difference between the me and the we. Like when I can get down to the we, because even when I'm afraid of something really bad happening, when I'm afraid of World War III, I think this is a real fear that a lot of people have. Or when the pandemic came and my husband and I work together and have a business that cannot be done remotely. We bought a house, and 2 weeks later, our business was shut down for 5 months. Like the financial fears. The way that I can walk through that fear without picking up a substance or a damaging process is by trusting that something greater than me has a plan that's better than mine. That things just are, that even the things that are uncomfortable have a purpose because I can learn from them. And it's going to make me stronger, trusting in the good and trusting the process of the human experience.
Yeah, I want to go and dive in on a couple things there. You really struck a chord when you said that feeling of not being enough, not doing enough, not making it. And I think a lot of us feel this thing that we have to earn our existence and we have to earn our love. And there's something deeply damaged in us that needs repairing and needs to be told that we're safe, we're loved, we deserve to exist. Whether you are a CEO of a multi-million dollar company or you work a job that just feeds your soul, it doesn't matter. Like, you are a human here and you deserve love and safety and security, whether or not like you go quote unquote earn it out in the world. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons that I've had to learn and I've had to give to myself, is that it's okay. You are loved no matter what you do or accomplish or don't accomplish. At the end of the day, like, that is not what defines you. There is more to you than any of the masks that you wear in this world, any of the job titles, any of the financial markers you hit. It almost doesn't matter, because that's just not what defines you as a worthy human on this planet. And I think that's kind of just going back to that gaping hole we have inside and the fear that we feel. Like, we kind of have to get right with ourselves and love ourselves and parent ourselves and feel okay and safe in the world. Just knowing, like, it's okay to be us. It's okay to show up authentically. It's okay. And that's been a big part of my journey. But you touched on something right at the end there that I want to delve in on. I got it. Okay, this ties back full circle to the substances not being the problem. And that's not necessarily viewing those as good or bad. But as you're talking about like these scary circumstances, as there's a lot of fear going through them, it's because your mind doesn't like change. Your mind wants to keep you safe and protected and in this state of not unfamiliar, because that's scary. And it's really interesting. And this is a total like reframe on how a lot of us look at the things in life, but there's like no good or bad events. And you don't know when you're going through something if it's good or bad, right? Something could seem really scary in the moment, like losing your job or breaking up with a partner, but in the end, be really important and ultimate for you getting on a better path and being a better person and living a better life. And so, like, just in like a grander context of things, I think it's just really helpful how we approach everything in our life with an openness and a expansive what's possible here, instead of getting stuck in this constricted, scared state. And this is easier said than done, but it part of getting out of that fear response is really managing our mindset and how we think about things and trusting, like you said, that there's a higher purpose. Everything ultimately works out for the better good, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment. And that's just such a part of the journey, I think. And I do think that there are herbs that can support that. I know when I'm having a daily bowel movement every day, I am less fearful of the world.
Well, yeah, I mean, we could talk about laxatives.
Haritaki, my best friend,
Yes.
which actually I do think Ayurveda does call the destroyer of fear.
Does it?
It helps, yep.
Is it the
Because
destroyer of fear?
going back to how we look at things energetically, everything's connected, the mind, the body, the physical. And when we support the physical, it helps the mind. And one of the things that aggravates fear is this vata dosha. It's too much air and ether in our upper parts of our body. And so when we can ground that down and turn it into something that's grounding and supportive and secure, we have less fear. Isn't that amazing?
Well, I mean, you just blew my mind because I'm so I lied. There is an herb in my Ayurveda, in my Materia Medica. I'm just going to read this. Haritaki is described as the remover of diseases. Hara is also the name of Lord Shiva, thus reflecting the sacred nature and exalted position of the plant, but it literally means green like the fruit. It's also abhaya, or fearless of any disease. It is said to have originated when the drop of immortal nectar fell from the heaven to earth, and is considered to be the best herb for the digestive system and lung. I thought it just produced bowel movements. But that's the other thing, right? Because vata, we talked a little bit about the three doshas, and vata is air and ether, and people who have a lot of vata in their systems, whether you are constitutionally more vata or if circumstances in your life have just caused vata to become excessive in your system. Vata people are flighty and ungrounded and chaotic. It's made up of air and ether. When that air arises, this is where the term airhead comes from. These are, if you know an airhead, there's too much vata, and haritaki is used to treat vata, to push that vata down and out. And fear, anxiety, insomnia, migraines, psychosis, these are all vata things. You find a lot of vata people who are addicts too. They really like downers, heroin and benzos.
Yes, because they want to come back into balance. They want that grounding energy. And it's so I am very careful how I talk about these things because we're getting into some spiritual talk that I think it's hard to understand with our modern lens and our modern language of health. But like when you said, I just think of it as a laxative. Everything we do in the body has a impact on the mind and on the spirit because it's all intertwined, and you can't necessarily separate out these things. So we talk about detoxing, we talk about neurotransmitters, and we talk about all these things in a very Western lens. And then we're kind of shifting back and forth with the Ayurvedic lens. But it's just so important to recognize the work we do. We're clinical herbalists. It's very clinical, but we're also very spiritual. And we realize we're not just giving you a laxative to help move things through your system. We're giving your body a way to let go of the things that no longer serve it, to let go of the toxins and the buildup. And when you're free of that and your body's not holding on to it, it changes your ability to think.
Well, yes. And, and I look at things through the Ayurvedic lens and the traditional Chinese lens. I've really worked very hard to use more Western language that's palatable to the people that I work with and people who listen to this podcast. When people come to me and they have anxiety or insomnia and I'm talking to them about their bowel movements, they look at me like they're frustrated because they're not coming to me to talk about their bowel movements. And what I tell people is, look, if your body is a home, like your body is your home, you live in your body. If your pipes are not draining in your house and they're backed up, you're going to have a lot of other problems. Like the plumbing has to work. Everything has to flow freely. And so we address that. And I don't get into the why or the how, but I just promise that if you're having a full evacuation, a good bowel movement every day, you're going to be less anxious and you're going to sleep. And usually they just kind of look at me like I'm crazy, but they're willing to give it a shot. And that's all I ask. It's trust the process.
Well, I find once people start seeing results, then they take an interest in this different way of thinking, and then it's really interesting, and it does click, and it does make sense, and on the onset, yeah, it sounds so foreign and mystical and folksy and all the things, but when you can approach it with an open mind, it makes sense and it works. And as we're kind of winding down the episode, I just want to put a bow on this and just tie this back to addiction and our model of supporting the mental and the physical and the spiritual, and how no matter what journey you're taking on the health front or the addiction front, it's a very interesting thing to just acknowledge and recognize that everything we do, every input matters and affects our outcomes.
Yeah, it's a holistic view. It's a holistic view. Anything that you're trying to recover from, it doesn't matter if I'm trying to recover from my fibromyalgia, or you're trying to recover from your anemia or your addiction. There is no practitioner that you can go to or any one person who's going to be able to hand you a magic substance or press a magic button that's going to solve your problems. It may seem that way. I feel like it seems that way because all my life, if I was sick, I went to the doctor, doctor wrote a prescription, I took a pill, I took this pill for 2 weeks, the sickness went away. Magic pill. It was a magic pill that made the fill in the blank, the sinus infection, the strep throat, it went away. There was never any discussion about why did I get a sinus infection or strep throat in the first place? But like what's going on with the tissues in my nose? What's going on with the tissues of my throat? All my life, if I had trouble sleeping or when I had back pain, I went to the doctor. Doctor wrote me a prescription. It worked. It was a magic pill. Pain went away. And there was no discussion about maybe you should move your body and like stretch your legs and strengthen the muscles in your back. No discussion about maybe you should do some meditation and quit eating processed foods so that you don't feel anxious. But that solution is there. There are magic pills that will fix the one issue and not address the underlying cause. They're seemingly magic pills.
Seemingly. I wouldn't call them magic. They come at a cost.
They do come at a cost. They do come at a cost because there are side effects and you build up tolerances. There's a limit. Then you need more. I read a study years ago from a woman in the UK who ran a rehab facility that focused only on helping people to withdraw from benzos. And she said that the problem with benzos is that they were never designed to be taken for more than 8 weeks maximum. Depending on the benzo, they're designed to be taken for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. Any longer than that, what happens is you start to go through withdrawals between doses, and the withdrawal symptoms are the exact same as the symptom that the medication is originally prescribed for. And that's why you have someone who will go and get a prescription for 0.25 milligrams of Xanax, and 3 years later, they're on 2 milligrams. So their doses, they're on 8 times the dose now 3 years later. They're not any better than they were when they first started taking the 0.25 milligrams. They are now just taking the medication to stop from going through withdrawals between doses. And so the point of this entire study was that these medications are designed to be given short term for people who have major trauma. You've been raped, you've been robbed, you were run over by a train, somebody you love just died. And it helps you get through this time where it's really difficult so that then you can start to pick up the holistic approaches. So when you want to recover from anything and seek a holistic approach, which is a lasting approach where you can get real results that work for a lifetime, it requires that you change some habits and you take some herbs and you change your diet and you incorporate some meditation or some exercises or some mindfulness practices. Or, I mean, gosh, there's so many tools out there. It's mind-blowing to me how many tools there are. But you've got to look at the whole picture. And I don't know, this holistic solutions are not for pussies.
I like to say it takes courage to go this route. I really commend people that do go this path because it does take a level of taking responsibility for everything, like radical responsibility for your health, for your well-being, for your outcomes. And not everyone gets there. And it's really the only way that you are set free and you are not bound to the external world impacting how you feel, how you react, how you navigate everything. And not everyone get there. It's not an easy place to get to. So anybody who is on this path, like, I commend that it takes courage, and kudos to you because you're breaking free.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, you could just tell them, stop being a pussy.
No, it's not for pussies. It's for warriors. People who are on this path are warriors.
There we go.
And we're winning the war. I love what you just said because it brings us full circle, right? It's a spiritual condition. And that's the delusion, right? The part of the human experience is that we're filled with delusions. And we look around and say, well, oh, I'm sick because it's my allergies. It's where I live. It's because I'm in the city, or it's because all the additives in the food. It's all these outside circumstances. It's the same thing that you hear a lot in the world of alcoholism and addictions. I drink the way I drink because the way people treat me. The lady at the Walmart Photoshop lied to me and hurt my pride and made me feel like a fool when I was 5 years old. I wrote that down once or twice. Okay. That was a
I
thing.
was like, that was oddly specific.
I was carrying it around for 30 years. But it's these things that the outside circumstances that I want to blame. At the end of the day, it's an inside job. And it's my internal condition that has to be changed. And then we can become resilient. And then I can go and I can walk around. And even if there are chemtrails, I can breathe the air and be okay. That's what I want.
Yeah. And we have to get right with ourselves and take that on, because we can never control anything else. And the blows are going to come. The wind is going to blow. The waves are going to crash. The things happen. And the only way to stay sturdy throughout whatever's happening externally that you can't control is to get right with yourself. And this isn't an herbal recommendation, but probably one of the most pivotal books I've read in my life is The Four Agreements, and learning not to take things personally, and realizing that there's my internal world and there's the external world, and there's what I can control, which is me, and then there's everything else. And I can't sit here and be a victim to everything else happening in the world, because that's not an empowering place to live. You're out of control. You're not going to be able to change if you are just subject to the whims of everything else happening. So that book, I don't know if you've read it, but it's one of my all-time favorites. It's simple and just lays it out in a very nice way that really shows that we've got to be in control of ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I actually have not read the Four Agreements, which is funny because I know I think I probably seem like someone who has.
Well, you get there other ways, though. There's so many spiritual things that say the same thing in different words, and these are just the words that spoke to me when they did.
I'm a big fan of James Allen. The Way of Peace is probably my favorite thing that he ever wrote. He was a spiritual writer at the turn of the century. I'm going to share one of my favorite quotes that I've ever read that helped me with surrender and acceptance, probably more than anything that I ever have, because I thought about it when you said what you said about control. Like, I'm the only thing that I can control. And I've come to believe that the only thing that I have power over is how hard I exert myself to surrender to the universe, because that's just happening. And so in the Shanti Parva, which is basically a sequel to the Bhagavad Gita, let's see if I can not butcher it. It says, no man can achieve anything by sacrifice or adoration. No man can give anything to another man. The great ordainer has made time, with a capital T, the tool of acquisition for all things. Everything's going to happen in time.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the Bhagavad Gita, because that's another book that I know you've read and I've read, that not to be attached to the fruits of our labor. Like, we can only do what we do. The rest is up to God.
Mm-hmm. The rest is God, the universe. There's a saying that something that some Sikhs say is, I am the seer, God is the doer. God is doing what I'm doing. Like, I'm just a vessel. I'm just like observing it. So then I don't get to take any credit for anything that I do. Whether it's Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. And it translates basically to all victories belong to God. Everything I do, if I do something good or I do something bad, There is no good, there is no bad, there just is. I'm not even doing it. And that's probably way over people's heads.
I was just about to say we're about to go down a rabbit hole.
We're in the rabbit hole.
Well, let's just leave it at this and say if you ever are interested in the holistic approaches that Alicia and I take to helping people on this journey, visit our websites. I'm at thelivingwellnesslounge.com. Alicia's at holisticallycorrect.com. And I just want to put it out there again that we welcome any questions or comments on any of these things that we're talking about. Today got a little heady, and I know it's not maybe the most digestible for everybody. So we're curious to get your take and if any of this resonated and if there's anything you're struggling with, like use us as a resource because we're all just walking each other home. We all just want to feel good and all the things, and we're here to support people on the journey.
Well, thank you so much for this today, Lila. This was a great idea. I like getting a little heady. I'm just a little promise to all the listeners. We'll deep dive into some more herbal stuff in the next episode. And it's a holistic approach.
Yes, I totally agree. It'd be a disservice not to talk about this part or this aspect of it because it all matters.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we'll see y'all next time.
If you're interested in Alicia and Lila's offerings, coaching programs, or other exciting events, please check out our websites, thelivingwellnesslounge.com and holisticallycorrect.com.